Before Manchester City became the club everyone talks about, argues about, and accuses of being nothing before the money, they lived a very different existence. They were relegated, they were promoted, they were relegated again. They even spent a season in the third tier of English football, and for a lot of people, that's where the story stops. Ask anyone and you'll hear, City were rubbish. City had no history. City were saved by a takeover. So today, on Retro Football Club, we're asking a question that gets thrown around far too easily. How bad were Manchester City before the takeover? We'll start with the facts, then document the rollercoaster of the 1990s and into the new millennium. Before you can talk about how bad Manchester City were before the takeover, you first have to separate reputation from reality, because the two are not the same. Ask most football fans today what City were like pre-2008, and you'll hear the same recycled answers. They were rubbish, they had no history, they were a yo-yo club, they were basically irrelevant. But surprisingly to some, none of that actually holds up when you look at the facts. Long before the takeover, Manchester City were already one of England's more decorated clubs. They weren't a fabricated giant, they were a fallen one. City won the First Division title, the precursor to the Premier League, in 1937 and again in 1968. They lifted the FA Cup in 1904, 1934, 1956 and 1969. They won the League Cup in 1970 and 1976. And crucially, something that often gets ignored, they were European trophy winners. In 1970, Manchester City won the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, beating Polish side Górnik Zabrze in Vienna. At the time, the Cup Winners' Cup was considered a major European honor, running alongside the European Cup and UEFA Cup, and was fiercely contested until it was folded into the UEFA Cup in the late 1990s. That same City side also completed a unique double that season by winning the League Cup as well. City were not a club invented in 2008, they were a club with real pedigree that slowly unraveled. And when you compare City's pre-takeover honours to other clubs often spoken about as historically bigger, or said to have enjoyed golden eras, the picture becomes even clearer. Before 2008, Manchester City had more league titles than Nottingham Forest and West Ham United, the same number as Tottenham Hotspur, and more than Chelsea before Roman Abramovich. They also had more FA Cups than Leeds United, Nottingham Forest and West Ham, and more League Cups than Leeds United and Newcastle United. They were not one of the traditional top 5 or 6 dominant clubs of English football, but their trophy haul was better than most, and in several cases on par with or superior to clubs routinely spoken about as historically bigger during the 20th century. This is where the modern narrative starts to break down. And even during the years when things went wrong, very wrong, City were never a small club. Crowds stayed high, away followings stayed strong, and Main Road remained one of the most atmospheric grounds in the country, even when the football was painful. In fact, Manchester City still hold the record for the highest ever attendance in English football, when 84,569 packed into Main Road to watch an FA Cup tie against Stoke City in 1934, a record that still stands today. There's also one claim that gets thrown around constantly, and is almost always exaggerated, the idea that City were stuck in the third tier for years. That simply isn't true. Manchester City played exactly one season at the third level of English football, the 1998-99 season. 1 year, not a decade, not an era. One catastrophic low point, followed immediately by promotion via the playoffs at Wembley. Yes, it was humiliating. Yes, it should never have happened. But it wasn't a long-term condition, it was a symptom of chaos. And that distinction matters. Because when people say City were bad, what they usually mean is that City were unstable, poorly run, badly governed, reacting instead of planning. They weren't failing because they lacked history, support or stature. They were failing because the club spent decades lurching from one decision to the next without a coherent long-term vision. If Chapter 1 explains why the idea of Manchester City being nothing before the takeover is wrong, then Chapter 2 explains why that idea gained traction in the first place. Because City's problems didn't come from a lack of history or support, they came from a long, grinding period of instability, one that began quietly, then snowballed. The first real warning sign came in 1987, when Manchester City were relegated from the top flight. It wasn't a dramatic collapse at the bottom of the table, it was the product of a side that had lost momentum and direction. City had been FA Cup finalists in 1981, and still felt like an established First Division club, which is why that relegation felt so jarring. They bounced back, as City often did. Promotion followed, and once again there was a sense that normal order had been restored. But the pattern, fall, recover, fail to stabilize, was already forming. The real damage came in the mid-1990s. City were founding members of the Premier League and a perennial mid-table side, capable of beating anyone on their day, but equally capable of collapsing without warning. Perfectly summed up by the old phrase, a team that would build you up, just to let you down. By the 1995-96 season, City was still in the Premier League, but once again living dangerously. Despite a late fight for survival, they were relegated on the final day in one of the most embarrassing episodes in top-flight history. Before the era of smartphones, players were informed late in the second half that a 2-2 draw against Liverpool would be enough. Time wasting followed. The ball was knocked into the corner. Then came the realization, the information was wrong. City needed another goal. The game ended 2-2. And City, under former World Cup winner Alan Ball, were relegated. It was devastating, not just because of the drop, but because it confirmed something deeper. City were now a club that couldn't quite get out of their own way. Even then, expectations were high that they'd bounce straight back. Instead, things unraveled further. The 1996-97 season became symbolic of dysfunction. Managers came and went, most infamously Steve Coppell resigning after just weeks in charge. The lack of direction was no longer subtle, it was obvious. Decisions were reactive, not strategic. City fans, famous for their gallows humor, coped the only way they knew how, still singing about losing home and away every week. By the end of the 1997-98 season, the unthinkable happened. Manchester City were relegated again, despite still having talent in the squad, with players like Georgi Kinkladze and Uwe Rosler on the books. 2 relegations in 3 seasons, from the Premier League to the third tier, wasn't the story of a small club failing, it was the story of a big club imploding. Even more painfully, City were relegated despite winning their final match, thrashing Stoke City. Their fate was sealed elsewhere, a cruel detail that only deepened the sense of helplessness. City were now members of the nationwide League Division 2, a club that had won league titles, FA Cups, League Cups and a major European trophy was heading into the 1998-99 season in the third tier. For outsiders it became a punchline, for supporters it was disbelief mixed with exhaustion. To put it into perspective, clubs like Grimsby Town, Stockport County, Bury and Crewe Alexandra were in the division above, while City were facing Macclesfield Town, York City, Lincoln City and Walsall. And yet, even at this lowest point, the same truth remained. City hadn't shrunk, the fan base didn't disappear, the club didn't fade into obscurity. What collapsed wasn't support or stature, it was structure. This wasn't a slow drift into irrelevance. It was repeated instability, layered season upon season, until something finally gave. The season was full of ups and downs, but crucially, the fans stayed. Attendances of over 32,000 were recorded. And despite inconsistency, City returned to the second tier at the first attempt, doing it the only way they ever could. The typical City way. 2 late goals to make it 2-2 in the playoff final, before defeating Gillingham on penalties at Wembley. And with that, the climb back began. After the Wembley miracle, City went into the 1999-2000 season full of belief, and they did what a lot of clubs promise, but very few actually manage. They went up again. City finished second in the first division, securing automatic promotion and completing back-to-back promotions. The final day summed it all up, thrashing Blackburn Rovers at Ewood Park, with City fans watching from the hills outside the stadium before invading the pitch at full time. It was sobering for Blackburn, a club only 5 years removed from their Premier League title. Sean Gota was the defining figure, finishing as City's top scorer with 23 league goals. And once again, the crowds told their own story. Average attendances of over 32,000, numbers that underlined a familiar truth. Support had never been the problem. City were back in the Premier League just 12 months after playing third-tier football. But this is where the story stays honest. That climb had been so rapid that when City returned to the Premier League in 2000 to 2001, it quickly became clear they were undercooked for the level. Not because of size or expectation, but because of structure and squad depth. Joe Royle tried to adapt a promotion-winning squad to Premier League life, adding experience in the form of players like George Weah, Andre Kanchelskis and Alfie Haaland. But the balance never quite worked. City finished 18th and were relegated straight back to the first division. And once again, the pattern repeated. City could climb, but they couldn't stabilise. Joe Royle was sacked in May 2001. It wasn't just a managerial change. It was an admission that the club needed a new identity if it was ever going to escape the boom and bust cycle. Within days, City went big. Keegan was appointed in May 2001. He had recently left his role as the England manager, and the man who had taken Newcastle United agonizingly close to 2 Premier League titles. This wasn't framed as a rebuild, it was framed as waking something up. And whatever opinions exist about Keegan tactically, he gave City exactly what they needed at that moment: personality, belief, and forward momentum. Crucially, he made City stop looking like a club waiting for the next disaster. The response to relegation was emphatic. Under Keegan, City didn't just go up, they dominated. They were First Division champions in 2001 to 2002, finishing on 99 points and scoring 108 league goals. That season mattered because it wasn't just about promotion. It was proof that City could function properly again, not perfectly, but coherently enough to overwhelm a division. The following season is often overlooked. City returned to the Premier League and didn't scrape survival. They finished 9th, top half, a remarkable achievement for a club that had been in the 3rd tier just 4 years earlier. The squad reflected that ambition. Robbie Fowler still only 28, Nicolas Anelka in his prime, Paulo Wanchope, Sylvain Distin, and the experience of Peter Schmeichel. It was also City's final season at Main Road, a symbolic goodbye to a stadium that had seen everything: triumph, chaos, humiliation, and loyalty. By the summer of 2003, City weren't good in the modern sense, but they were no longer collapsing. They had a proven top-flight manager, a squad capable of pushing for Europe, and a brand new state-of-the-art 40,000-seat stadium waiting. They'd proven they could recover quickly. They'd proven they could win promotion convincingly. They'd proven they could return to the Premier League and land in the top half. And yet, nothing still felt secure. This is the part of the pre-takeover story that often gets missed. City had climbed back up the leagues, but they still hadn't escaped the pattern that had defined them for years. Progress followed by uncertainty. Optimism followed by anxiety. Despite adding names like Champions League winners Steve McManaman and Michael Tarnat, as well as top European talent like Daniel van Buyten and Paul Bosveld, and England goalkeepers David Seaman and David James, City remained hit and miss. The warning signs returned quickly. City's first season in their new home ended in 16th place. Despite possessing a squad on paper that many backed as dark horses to break the top 4, the attacking freedom of Keegan's best moments faded, defensive fragility returned, and midway through the 2004 to 2005 season, Keegan resigned, citing exhaustion and frustration. His departure mattered. He had lifted City, but he hadn't stabilized them. Stuart Pearce followed. Discipline replaced adventure. City survived but stagnated. The 2005 to 2006 season ended safely but without identity. The 2006 to 2007 campaign became infamous, with City enduring 7 consecutive home games without scoring, a Premier League record. This wasn't crisis football, but it was stagnant football, and a period known by City fans are the worst they've played in the Premier League. And stagnation is dangerous for a club that had already lived through collapse. Off the pitch, ownership uncertainty continued to quietly undermine progress. City weren't broke, but they were constrained. Financial caution limited long-term planning, and ambition was constantly checked by fear of overreach. City existed in a strange middle ground, too big to accept mediocrity, too limited to escape it. Then came a new owner, former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. The mood briefly lifted. Another former England manager arrived, the mercurial Sven-Göran Eriksson. More big names followed, Brazilians Elano and Giovanni, as well as experienced professionals like Martin Petrov and Benjani. For the first time in decades, City went into the new year sitting 4th in the league, trailing only United, Arsenal and Chelsea. They eventually finished 9th, but crucially, they qualified for European football. For the first time in years, City felt like they were moving forward. But once again, stability didn't last. The 2008 to 2009 season began with yet another reset. Eriksson was dismissed, and Shinawatra found himself embroiled in a financial scandal back home. Back in Manchester though, Blackburn manager Mark Hughes was appointed manager. City's summer business included the likes of Vincent Kompany, Pablo Zabaleta, Tal Ben-Haim, whilst Brazilian striker Joe, who had arrived from CSKA Moscow with a prolific scoring record, joined club legend Sean Wright-Phillips in coming back from Chelsea. By September 1st, everything changed. Sheikh Mansour completed his takeover of Manchester City. The City that was handed over entered that period, having won 2 of their opening 3 Premier League matches, beating West Ham and Sunderland 3-0. They had also knocked EB Stramer and FC Midtjylland out of the UEFA Cup. And as you all well know, what followed is well documented. So, how bad were Manchester City before the takeover? The honest answer is, not bad in the way people like to pretend. They weren't a club with no history, they weren't a club with no support, and they weren't rescued from obscurity. They were a club with real pedigree that spent years sabotaging itself. Relegations weren't the result of apathy, they were the result of instability. Promotions weren't miracles, they were reactions. And success never stuck, not because City couldn't compete, but because they couldn't stand still long enough to build. The takeover didn't turn Manchester City into something new, it allowed them to stop falling apart. It brought structure where there had been chaos, planning where there had been panic, and permanence where there had only ever been short-term fixes. City didn't rise from nothing, they rose from instability. But that leads to the question that always hangs over this story. Where would Manchester City be without the money? Would they have eventually stabilized anyway? Would they have become a consistent Premier League club? Or would the same old cycle have returned? Progress, promise, collapse? There's no definitive answer. But one thing is clear. Manchester City didn't need inventing. They needed fixing. And once that happened, everything else followed. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to support our work, you can buy me a coffee. Just scan the QR code on the screen. And of course, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Retro Football Club, and hit that notification bell so you never miss what's coming next.